I'm gonna be the Puella.
You are a bit of a free spirit. You seem to have the ability to make people feel alive.
Oh, thanks. I just don't want to lose myself in a relationship. I don't want to become ordinary.
So tell me, how can one lose themselves if they're in a committed relationship?
Being in a committed relationship feels like a cage.
What are you actually building in this current relationship?
Building? I don't think I'm building. I am aligning, preparing, and I'm just waiting for the right moment.
How long have you been aligning and preparing and waiting for the right moment?
The right moment hasn't revealed itself just yet. I don't believe in structure. I just live in the now. I live in the flow and I trust the universe. You might want to try it sometimes and just unclench your butt cheeks.
Trusting in the universe. So, what happens when the universe doesn't deliver?
Oh, you just worry too much. That's the ego talk. We are all one and all we need is just trust the universe, and that's all that matters.
Clara, you seem to disappear when things get serious. Just something I've noticed.
Sometimes a girl just needs some space. I do better when natural and free.
I noticed when intimacy starts, you have a pattern of always needing space.
Well, yeah, I mean, who doesn't? It just feels like you're trying to control me. People are naturally drawn to me, and my space needs to be respected. Welcome to The Shadow Knows, a podcast when we journey into the depths of psyche, mystery, and transformation. Hello, I'm Clara.
Hi, everyone. I'm Maureen.
And together, we explore the hidden forces shaping our lives, relationships, and collective story. In today's episode, we're exploring one of the most compelling and quietly disruptive archetype in Jungian psychology, the Puer Aeternus, the eternal youth. The archetypal energy carries imagination and idealism, creativity, and sensitivity.
Joining us once again is James Frazier, Jungian coach, holotropic, and neo-shamanic breathwork facilitator, to help us explore the Puer Animus through the Jungian lens and what it means to integrate imagination with responsibility. So, welcome, James. We want to understand the Puer archetype, and from a Jungian perspective, how would you describe the mature or integrated Puer Aeternus? And how does this differ from its shadow expressions, such as chronic avoidance, instability, or resistance to commitment?
Okay, great. Well, I think I should begin by acknowledging that there's a considerable amount of confusion, even among Jungians, about what Jung meant and some of his followers, people who carried his work forward. What do they really mean when they use the word puer or puer aeternus? And of course, it does mean the eternal youth, and we're all pretty familiar with the shadow expressions of it. But the first question is it really an archetype, or is it an archetypal expression, or is it, in the words of my main mentor, Robert Moore, a failure of initiation? So I think we need to just interject here and remind people that archetypes are archetypes, and they are energy patterns. They're like nuclear power plants. They don't operate like human level, but it is the human that has to deal with archetypes, and it is our responsibility to one, locate them, two, consecrate them, so to speak, three, learn how to regulate them. Jung himself, sometimes he refers to it as part of the divine child archetype. Now, this can be confusing for some people who like to have everything really differentiated, but it's possible that an archetype or archetypal pattern is actually part of an overseeing archetype, if you will, or even a combination of archetypes. And sometimes what we call an archetypal pattern can be archetypal in a sense that it's fairly universal, but we don't really think of it as an archetype itself. So, for example, in the shadow lover archetype, we certainly find the addicted lover, but typically we see it expressed in terms of people becoming actually addicted to outer substances. So I wouldn't say that alcoholism is an archetype. I would say that alcoholism is a manifestation of possession by an archetype or failure to initiate that particular love or energy and be able to bring it into a mature, expressive form. So we struggle with this, and I just want to acknowledge that it is a struggle, and you'll even hear me lapse into sometimes talking about it as an archetype, sometimes talking about it as a failure to initiate, in other words, a behavioral pattern. What are some of the shadow sides of it? What are some of the aspects of it? What are some of the failures of initiation that we typically see? So I'm going to use a cultural metaphor here real quickly because this is a down and dirty image. I've always been very struck, particularly by the fact that young boys my age, and that's real old, our cultural heroes were cowboys. That's what we got as the cultural hero of the masculine, which is kind of problematic on a couple of different levels. One, cow refers to a female, and two, boy is not an initiated male, which is just very telling to me. And so I also discovered this even before I knew about the Puer archetype in the film that Willie Nelson did called Honeysuckle Rose, which is thinly veiled biography of his life. And it shows all this Puer material. And he sings a song in there, which became pretty famous in country music, called Mamas Don't Let Your Babies Grow Up to Be Cowboys. And I can't do justice to the song, so I'm not going to try to sing it. But it's really quite interesting if you look at some of the lyrics of the song, which I'm going to take the liberty of just reading as a way of giving you a snapshot of this. Cowboys ain't easy to love and they're harder to hold. That's the puer. You can't hold on to the puer because they're flying. In fact, John Lee wrote a very influential book in the 1980s, which was also thinly veiled biography, by his own admission, by the way. I'm not revealing anything there, called The Flying Boy. And it was really about how the archetype had manifested in his own life and his struggles to get it aligned into a mature expression. They'd rather give you a song than diamonds or gold. Diamonds and gold being pretty material things, but also stable. Songs are pretty nebulous. If you don't understand him and he don't die young, he'll probably just ride away. I mean, that was the archetypal drama in the cowboy shows. Hero comes to town, falls in love with the most beautiful woman in town who happens to be single, oddly enough, deals with the evil in the town changes him or he changes the town. In the end, though, he gets on his horse and rides off into the sunset. That's the archetypal Western story, and that's what we grew up with. So a lot of us, particularly those in the 1960s, this was one of the major patterns kind of running through our lives, is that, well, we're going to die young anyway, so let's have fun today. It's a real refusal to go into any kind of sense of limitation, any facing of death, any responsibility. And much of the 1960s, of course, was quite beautiful and creative and incredible in its explosion in those areas and breaking out of old forms. But what was missing was a way to ground it. There was a lot of pathology that came out of that. And I'm speaking from experience. I spent the first half, most of my life in puer energy. And it's really difficult to, one, wake up to that fact, but then two, is to try to start doing something about it. One of the resistances of the puer energy is failure to grow up, failure to take on responsibility, failure to do initiation. So you could call it failed initiation, which of course I bang on about all the time.
Okay. So this question relates to potential rather than commitment. And it's also from my personal experience. What I've noticed the pattern that it was always being in a relationship that would hold a potential. And the moment that it got real, it started to feel boring and the charge would reduce. And there was the need to search for something else because only that intensity was the feeling of being alive. And so what makes the potential safer for a puer pattern than participation, and why can commitment feel like a kind of a death for puer?
Well, we could spend an entire day talking just about this question, honestly. It's that big. But I'm going to do a shorthand here. As most of the people who've seen me on these programs know, one of my main mentors was Robert Moore, who I think is one of the most brilliant Jungian theorists that ever came along. And Robert would actually say that the the puer is really a failure of initiation, and but especially a failure of initiation into the warrior and the sovereign archetype. So that means that the puer is largely, generally, a flooding of lover and magician energy. And the magician is the world of the ideals. It's infinite potentials. The magician never stops looking for more potentials. And there's great creativity in that, and also searching and questing, but there's also a lot of safety in that. I don't have to risk failure. I don't have to risk getting trapped. I don't have to risk getting confronted by my own limitations, especially the fact that I'm human. And of course, then that ultimate limitation is that we die. We're an interesting mix. We have the potential for spiritual experience as humans, the kind of vertical, but we're also tied to the horizontal. I don't care how much spiritual work you do, how idealistic you remain. You can sit zazen 23 and a half hours a day. You are going to die. And we are apparently the only creatures that know that. So we have a secret fear of that, which Groff showed goes all the way back to our birth process, which itself is a death, rebirth kind of motif. I would say, well, part of the problem is getting to the place where you can have connection to that divine child without being identified with it or without being consumed by it and without it preventing you from doing the other initiations that you need to do. In astrological language, this would be Mercury. Mercury is all over the place. Mercury's duality, and it's everything in between, and duplex and capable of either. It's Saturn. It's the limits, the rules. This is the way you have to do it. The blockages, the things that actually help us mature. Maturity doesn't come from complete freedom. It comes from things that stop you, that slow you down, that you have to struggle with. And you can see this, of course, in the people who are cursed with being born with everything. They often have very, very lopsided personalities. They have a real struggle coming into this world. Or people who've gone into spiritual bypass and, they're always in touch with the ascended masters and getting direct spiritual downloads. Meanwhile, you ask their family members what they're like, or behind the scenes. This is the guru, who is full of all this enlightenment, and then turns out it's really sexually dysfunctional with all the devotee females in the back room. It is actually a divine child problem in the sense that we come in, we're in a divine child, and of course babies just glow. They elicit that projection, if nothing else. But we're not supposed to stay there because that's an unconscious identification with the divine. We're supposed to go through our developmental processes. This, by the way, is from my point of view, the central theme of the story of Genesis. I won't go into it, but look into it sometime. You'll see what I'm talking about. We're supposed to go from unconscious identification with the Great One to fully embodying human form. And with all that encompasses, which is absolutely limitation. And to be mature is to be responsible. So again, we're back into the sovereign quadrant because it's only the sovereign that can bring about order out of chaos. Whereas the puers often love chaos. Just like the lover and the magician, they thrive in chaos. It's only the warrior and the king and the queen that can bring about right order. So here again is where I would point to failure of initiation. You're not balanced in these archetypal energies. Thus, you're too lopsided in two of them, have too much of two of them, and too little of the other two. And you can see this in artists, for example. You'll have some artists who really flash on the scene, and by 17, they're famous, and by 27, they're dead. That whole thing around the rock stars dying at 27 is an exact manifestation of this. Whereas you find other artists who manage to get this pretty balanced. They get up at 6 o'clock in the morning and they work till 5 in the afternoon. They may go get drunk that night. They may still not be a fully mature human, but they've at least got more of that Senex energy. They've got it better balanced.
James, you just mentioned Senex, and it seems like there is some sort of axis between the Puer, Puella, and the Senex. Can you talk about more how the Senex is kind of balancing? Is that what actually matures, the Puer Puella energy?
Yes, I would. And along the lines of any tension of opposites in the psyche, you often are going to heal one of them by putting the energy in the other one. So, in other words, if you're flooded with lover energy, what you need is warrior. So, warrior work is what you need to get that into a better balance. The opposite energy to the eternal youth is the wise old man or wise old woman. We used to get a sense about this, even if you didn't know anything about psychology, because almost in every little community, here in America anyway, the New Year's Eve festivities were often attended by the community, and they were generally held in the school auditorium in little towns like I grew up in. And they would have the New Year's Eve play. And part of that play contained these two archetypal energies. One would be somebody would come out in diapers. That was the eternal youth. And then somebody would come out with as a wise old man, generally, could be a wise old woman, but the wise old man had a big long white beard, big long white coat, but was carrying a sickle for the hand device for chopping hay, which is very hard work, by the way. If you've ever tried to run one of those things, you have some appreciation for what farmers went through. But that's also the sign for Saturn. And so here you have the divine child being born, the birth of the new year, but the old has to go and die is generally the way that was interpreted. But both of those were given equal play. So there is such a thing as the wise old man and wise old woman, and they generally fall under what we would actually accurately call eldership. But in a culture that fosters worship of youth and eschews ideas such as eldership, many people don't even wake up to the fact that they're supposed to be doing this until midlife because the American zeitgeist is more is better. I mean, honestly, if my partner sends me to the grocery store to pick up a bag of Cheerios, I'm going to be on the phone asking her, does she want cherry Cheerios, the gluten-free Cheerios, the fiber Cheerios, does she want raisins? I mean, there's 42 Cheerios. So we have what Kierkegaard would refer to as the sickness of infinitudes, endless choice, but not the ability to limit that choice. And thus we miss out on a lot of wisdom because and maturity because we're always going for potentials and possibilities. The fear of the flying boy is being trapped. The wise old man and the wise old woman have learned the wisdom of limits. So let's just take one example. If you are really under the influence of this puer energy and you have this sub-motif that the good die young, and I'm not going to live very long, you won't ever learn how to put away money for a rainy day because as soon as you get it, you may go spend it because you don't want any limitations on you. You want freedom. I've got, an extra $100. I've got to go buy something, which is what the American consumer culture runs on, by the way. We don't buy stuff we need, we buy stuff we want. But the wise old man and the wise old woman have learned to delay gratification. They've learned to put away things for the rainy day. Ultimately, the puer, as they get older, they experience more and more entrapment. And if they wind up without any retirement funds, they're going to be really entrapped. Whereas the Synex energy put a little bit away every year and built that and invested in it. And now they have the possibility for a comfortable retirement. The Synex is rejected by the puer, and maybe to a certain extent the other way around because the Synex realizes the foolishness of the puer. When I was young, we were always taught Aesop's fables, and one of the most famous ones is the story of the caterpillar and the ant. And the ant is plodding along storing food, and every day he walks by this caterpillar who's fiddling away, leaning against a fence post. And the ant keeps saying, you better start working and build up some food supplies because winter's coming. Grasshopper is fiddling away. Oh, I'm having fun. I don't need to worry about that. And kind of I'm going to die young anyway attitude. And then, of course, predictably, that's exactly what happens. The ant has all the winter supply stored up and lives through the winter. The grasshopper dies. Now, we were
What I wanted to ask you is how does this reflect the puer structure and what are the long-term psychological costs of, you know, waiting for clarity, waiting for the right calling? This could be forever.
Well, again, that's a question that could demand a lot of time, but I'll try to shorten it to very simply this. All you have to do to look for the negative consequences of this is simply look around you, or if you can stand it, turn on several news channels on one day and look at the world we live in. And the world we live in is marked by a number of different glaring problems. One is we don't have a lot of Synex energy. Most of our structures don't contain Synex energy. They're very puer. Our political structures, our educational structures, our economic structures, our religious structures, they're all flooding with puer kind of motifs. So it's the failure of initiation, it's the failure of eldership, it's the failure of people taking responsibility, of willing to do things that go beyond their own self-gratification. Or as the old Buddhist story, the measure of maturity is somebody who can plant a tree knowing they'll never sit under the shade of that tree. The net result of failure to initiate people into these sacred energies, into these archetypal patterns, is that we get immaturity at best, we get psychopathology at worst.
Speaking of relationships, it seems like the puer is just drawn and it seeks intensity in the romance and friendships, and it wants inspiration, but it struggles with endurance.
Well, there again, I would say it's a failure to initiate into the warrior, i.e., they don't have good boundary setting. They are able to commit to a mission, and they're distracted by every shiny object that comes along, or in this case, every lover that fits their unconscious anima or animus idealized masculine or feminine within. So they thrive on intensity instead of intimacy. And again, the fantasy replaces the real here and now presence. You have to also be a little bit charitable in the sense that almost everything culturally feeds into this. The idea that you're supposed to be eternally young looking. So if you're a woman turning 50, you better start looking for a plastic surgeon. We look to the 21-year-old rock stars for our inspiration. I mean, I can guarantee you most people know who the Kardashians are. Most people couldn't name a quantum physicist if their life depended upon it. And very few people would be able to name a great theologian. They may come up with the name of a preacher or somebody famous. In indigenous cultures, the revered and honored people were the old people. Because as Richard Pryor used to joke, you don't get to be old being no fool. You learned some things to make it that far. And the assumption was you're the wisest person. You're the one who you should go to for advice, not the 16-year-old. They don't know anything. But there again, intensity and glamour and fame has replaced substance. And then, of course, we're bombarded with images of perfection. We don't put in near the kind of physical labor just to survive that people did even 80 or 100 years ago. And hard physical work, difficult challenges of survival tends to move you more toward that Synex energy. The puers tend to die off. Whereas now, we used to think of 18 as being an adult. You left home, you got a job, or at least went off to college. Now we've got huge numbers of young people, and again, it's not all their fault. It's part of it's economics, and part of it is this for-profit college system, but they're having to move back home. And like with my generation, I couldn't wait to get out of the house. I couldn't wait to be on my own. So anyway, I think all of this it's tempting to make it simplistic. And I know it's a much more complicated thing than I have time to present here, or that I could even pull together. But that's what I would say would be one of the major things that we would look at as a failure of eldership.
The puer can be remarkably intelligent with a wonderful perspective and even spiritual, but sometimes it replaces action. How, James, do early experiences, especially around authority, containment, or instability, contribute to someone identifying unconsciously with the puer archetype?
Well, I think that's a pretty complex question if you dive pretty deep into it. It gets into the whole argument about nurture nature. How much do we come in with? What's the archetypal mix we come in with? I don't believe we're born a tabula rasa as Freud did. I do think we come in with, in spiritual circles, I would say life lessons. We come in different circumstances. We have different talents. We have different abilities. So it's hard to kind of pin this down. But if you had a real tyrant father, for example, you might very early on start equating authority with just pain and psychopathology, and might want to break out and it wouldn't even have to be an abusive father. It could just be a really repressive culture like I grew up in. I grew up in a very repressed culture. And so, given my particular nature and some of the archetypal mix that I believe I came in with, and some of the life situations, like I've shared before, I got hit by a car when I was 3.5. I spent 30 days in traction. Well, that linked to my birth process, and then that linked to my mother's decision to never ever let anything happen to me ever again in life, because I think that just about killed her from having an almost what they would call nervous breakdown in those days. So it played out in my case with being confined to my yard, the only kid in a town of 3,000 people who was required to stay in his yard. So it led to isolation, it led to frustration, it led to all kinds of other things that made me extremely motivated to get on my own. The problem was I didn't have any maturity to be on my own, but I totally identified with that puer energy. And so the day I got on my motorcycle and pointed it toward California at 8:30 in the morning after I graduated from high school the previous night was an incredibly liberating, I would say numinous experience, full of potential. So early wounding can certainly do this. Even our birth process could do this. I don't have time to go into that, but the two of you are very familiar with all Groff's work around the perinatal. So I do think that early wounding can play into this. I will say just very, very quickly, in case my message is being misinterpreted, I don't think we're supposed to kill the puer. We're not going to transform the puer. The puer is the puer. The synex is the synex. We are human. We're supposed to blend these two. It's up to us to bring about a mature expression of these. So the puer is connected to creativity. Two possibilities. I mean, you can, as I do, rag on about the modern life and all the things that have taken us away from nature, but you don't see me trying to live off grid, for example. I like the fact that I can come home and flip on a switch and lights come on. I like the fact that I don't have to go chop wood tonight or go chase down an animal and kill it and skin it, and try to eat it. I like a lot of the modern world. In fact, what we are doing today is a result of a kind of puer creative energy, particularly around after World War II in the early 1960s, and even the 1960s that I'm bragging on about today, full of puer possession, also led to the computer explosion. But then there were others who were able to really bring that into something very useful. And so again, we're doing something even here today that's very magical. It certainly beats anything any medieval Vegas ever thought about doing. And this was fantasy in the 1960s. The idea that you could broadcast an image and talk to somebody was from the old Dick Tracy cartoons. I don't want to give anybody the impression that it's all negative. What I'm talking about, though, is the possession states and failure to be initiated into that synapse energy. And of course, a lot of this goes back to our failure at various initiations, but most notably the puberty initiation. Because at puberty, you're supposed to come out of childhood, and childhood is supposed to be Puer Aeternus, exploring all the possibilities. And then there is this very sobering confrontation with Saturnian energies at the time of puberty. And for a woman, it's the consequences of sexuality. I mean, the consequences for a male for sexuality are pretty minimal. For a female, however, they can result in pregnancy, which can be life altering, both positively and negatively. So, in some sense, nature initiates women. Culture has always initiated men by copying what nature did to women. But it's an abrupt confrontation with Saturn. And it's an invitation to start developing warrior energy and ultimately sovereign energy in these mature expressions. We don't have that anymore. So naturally, everybody just kind of stays into the puer energy. And some of them don't look like puers because they're real macho. Not everybody's a spiritual type sitting zazen. Some of them are real gang members, but they've been initiated into the warrior cult of death, not a culture of living.
It's the positives, just what gives the spark of creativity. And James, my last question would be about our culture. If the culture continues to privilege novelty over endurance and inspiration over discipline, what do you see happening psychologically at the collective level?
More chaos. I can't predict, I'm not a psychic, But I can tell you that if you don't have connection and some balance in this, your life, and then by extension, the culture's life, will be increasingly chaotic. It'll be increasingly difficult to maintain institutions. It'll be increasingly difficult for people to even have a vision of order and right order. Unfortunately, it'll be a lot of suffering, both on the part of the planet as well as on people. And so I used to say this as a joke, but it's now become really tragic. But in my early career, I used to say to people, I may go broke doing this, but I'm never going to run out of work. And that's turned out to be far more prophetic than I intended it to be. I may still go broke, by the way, but in terms of people needing this kind of development and needing this kind of balance and needing to do this kind of inner work, it's far more critical today than when I started.
That's
Wow.
very dooming, but very honest. Thank you.
Today we explored the Puer Aeternus, not as immaturity, but as a profound psychological pattern shaped by imagination, longing, fear, and limitation. The invitation is not to suppress the Puer's creativity or vitality, but to integrate it. So again, I'm Maureen.
And I'm Clara, and I want to thank you for joining us to the Shadow Knows. And if today's episode resonated with you, we invite you to subscribe, share, and continue the conversation. Until next time, may you walk gently with your shadow, and may the wisdom guide you home. And remember, the shadow knows.
The shadow knows. Thank you, James.
Bye.